welcome to the $1 Billion Podcast, a weekly show about the entrepreneurial journey and making it big in any industry. We're your hosts, Joe White and Kane Daniel. Today we have with us Albert Collu, who is the president and CEO of Marathon Mortgage. He's been a high-level executive and a leader at numerous lender and brokerage networks for over 20 years. He's hugely respected in the industry and has been featured in a number of industry publications. He's also written his own book, Catapulting Change, Mindful Leadership to Launch Organizations and People, which we'd love to hear more about as well in a second. So it's really exciting to have such a significant industry leader with us and friend. We've known each other for, I don't know, Albert, how long has that been? Do you think?
Say 23 years at this point. Yeah. Wow.
Geez, do you ever feel like you're getting older?
Oh,
I don't. I feel like
absolutely.
I'm the same, and then I look in the mirror and I realize I'm lying to myself.
Well, I've got prototypical male DNA, right? I'm 18 years old in my mind, but 140 in physically.
Exactly. So, man, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you with us. And you know, what piqued my interest was the book title, Catapulting Change. And, you know, this is a podcast on how we get here and your history in the industry. But maybe you want to just talk super briefly about, or not briefly, about the mindful leadership to launch organizations and people, because catapulting change is something that I think is always important to discuss and to consider when, you know, especially people in the industry who are looking at launching their own brokerages. There's so much to consider. So maybe give a little overview of your book.
Yeah, you know, I actually wasn't expecting to talk about the book, but first of all, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. But as far as the book is concerned, you know, to be very open with you, Joey, the way that book actually evolved is others that I've known in the industry forever thought I just arbitrarily decided to sit down one day and just write this book. And there's some truth to that, but believe it or not, I'm a bit of an organizational geek, right? So anyone who works with me will tell you that I am incessant about keeping notes. Just the way I roll, right? It just keeps me on point. But, you know, I've been keeping notes, if you will, or observations for probably the better part of 18 to 20 years. Just things I would just, you know, not to quote CC Music Factory, but things that make you go, right? When you're sort of coming up in your career and you say to yourself, you know, that's the kind of stuff I just do not want to do if I ever have the fortune to lead an organization. Sure. And you start writing these things down. Next thing you know, you've got 18, 19, 20 years of pent up notes that accumulate to 20, 30 pages in bullet form. It's like, wait a minute now. So, you know, the book is actually predicated on one fundamental thing, right? Is that I think some organizations, too many organizations, to be very honest with you, undervalue the assets of their organization. So, you know, a lot of times they think it's the widgets or it's the service that they're offering. But my opinion, and I'm not a perfect creature, but I absolutely believe that I don't care what the widget or service is, the power of any success is going to be its people. That's one thing. Right? And that's a in a lot of ways, too, that's kind of a fleeting, you know, nicey-touchy kind of comment. But at the end of the day, when you start to get down to the micro level of managing a business and people, you got to make sure you're executing. You got to make sure you've maintained the standard. You got to make sure that there is some prescribed approach in terms of how you change management and turn a company around. But the whole book is based on those observations and companies that probably more often than not take their people for granted.
You know what, that is incredibly timely, that type of message as well, especially with the advent of AI really seeping into all aspects of our lives. And, you know, it being able to do some of the roles that people can do. But like we know in this industry, it's a people industry. You can use technology to do calculations and submit applications, but you know, at the end of the day, people deal with whom they know and they trust, right? So that's a really good message, especially now.
And good for you, Joe. I mean, there's a subtlety in AI. I actually had an experience last week personally with someone who decided to use a chatbot on a response to an email. Unfortunately, this guy is kind of like a younger brother. I watched him sort of grow up past him in my past life at Verico. Now he's got his own firm. And I said, listen, I love you. And I'm going to tell you this because I care. Don't ever use a chatbot on me again. He's like, how did you know? I said, I've known you for 8-9 years. You can tell tone and inflection. And the problem with these chatbots is they don't have the entire context. And sometimes they spit something across email that's really insulting. And, but to your point, Joe, I don't think that, look, I'm becoming more of a minority on this opinion, but I don't think you can turn the mortgage transaction and make it a Trivago kind of offering. This is, if that happens, that's because we all made a mistake and went down to the common denominator.
I think that we talk about this a lot now with the emergence of AI and what's going to happen and how important the human element is, and we think will always be, as we just talked about. We actually use ChatGPT and these other bots pretty much every day. I think what's really missing, what we talk about a lot, what's missing is the human element with ChatGPT, for example. So that if you're engaging with it and you ask it to write you an email, and it just writes you an email and you copy and paste it, that has nothing to do with you, right? So you have to provide it the context. You have to provide it what tone you want. You have to provide it examples of your writing. And so you can get closer to that. And then even when you get the output, you then have to go back and edit it. So it's just enhancing you. It's not meant to replace you. And I think that's what's missing. I think a lot of people are missing that piece of it.
Yeah. And I don't want to suck and blow right at the same time, but there is a spot for AI. My opinion is that it's probably more along the lines of what you're intimating, Kane, in terms of it's a great service offset. Like if you want to find efficiencies in your business and you want to find some great analytics. But I do think that it's being adopted a little too rapidly in our industry where people are allowing it to remove their human voice in dialogue. And I think that's really, really dangerous.
It's reckless.
Yeah.
So I guess, Albert, and we want to put the link up to the book near the end of the podcast here. I just wanted to back up a little bit, and I know we did the introduction, but I'm wondering if you can share maybe a little bit about your background and sort of your journey, like what led you into the industry, what sparked your interest to get into the industry altogether.
Did you, as a little boy, dream that I wanted to be in the mortgage brokering industry?
Joe, that's exactly what happened. From the time of 5, I said either I'm going to be an NHL hockey player, a famous guitarist, or I'm going to be a mortgage broker. Was one of those three.
Logical combination of choices there.
And God, was I lucky! I actually had the chance to do all the other ones. I said, not a chance. I want to be a mortgage broker. No, kidding aside, I don't think I'm unique, Kane or Joe, in terms of how I fell into the industry. No one woke up and said I'm going to be a mortgage broker. I literally stumbled in on it. I remember the first time I had a conversation with someone who said, listen, would you be interested in this industry? And I said, listen, honestly, apart from having a mortgage, I couldn't tell you much more than that. I might be able to tell you what my rate is as a borrower, but so I honestly, Kane, I wish I had a better story for you guys or Joe. I literally fell into it. And then, in my early days, immediately fell in love with it.
What was it about, I guess those early days, as you mentioned, what was it about the role or the industry that you fell in love with?
Okay, well, insert an eye roll after this, because it's going to sound very cliche. Two things. I was really lucky because I came right into the business, Kane, as not as a broker per se in terms of actually going out and finding my own business, although there was a little bit of that. I was inserted right away to help manage, coach, mentor a team. So I had two simultaneous things that stuck out right away. I do, as cheesy as it sounds, I get a real kick out of pushing good people and helping them develop. Literally, I'm really cheesy in that I find when people shine, I shine indirectly. So I love to see them soar. So I enjoyed that. But the one thing I totally underestimated too, Kane, was, again, insert eye roll here, but there was this real deep sense of reward that I've never felt in another job where you can look back and say, geez, we did that. We helped that family get into a house. And maybe they didn't have the best situation economically or credit or whatever the case is, but we found them a nice landing spot to turn that key and drive the U-Haul on. Something I never really saw coming, but fell in love with it, Kane. And I still have it today, believe it or not.
I think that's a really important thing that you just said, especially for younger like millennials and younger that are actively seeking to make a difference. And it's not just about, the finance part of it. It's also about helping people. So I think that's sometimes missed when people think about what a broker does, that it is helping families and helping people. And you do get that sense of satisfaction and reward.
I mean, I deal with brokers, or we deal with brokers at Marathon that just bloody impress me, man. Like they do it right. They'll put their clients or recommend a product that is better for the clients, knowing that they're going to take less on commission and those types of things. And that's really, as far as I'm concerned, taking agency law, if you will, seriously, really says something about the ones that do it right. And then, by the way, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with you guys. There is a significant, distinct difference between a broker who does it right and a broker who doesn't come close to doing it right.
Absolutely. And what do you think? What do you think's necessary for the industry? I mean, the industry, the regulators introduced additional educational requirements, which, separates us from the banking industry to begin with. But what do you think it might take for brokerages to ensure that their agents and brokers are living up to the standards that you've just mentioned?
But I've always been troubled, Joe, with the notion that, and I'm being cavalier here, that an agent who's never had any financial experience in terms of selling a service like we are can take a quote-unquote crash course, let's say a 5-day course, and at the 6th day, they've earned the right to sit at a kitchen table and manage the Canadian's largest liability of their life. I mean, that I have never been able to reconcile that, right? But I also understand you got to balance that. You don't want to limit people. I think we have an opportunity to elevate the education. And you're right, Joe. There is continuing education out there. And I don't want to devalue academia. But listen, it's one thing to go to university class and learn something about monetary policy. It's another thing for someone to say, you're working here today, sit at that desk and start actually moving money around in the political sphere. It's like, whoa. Yeah, that's very different.
Absolutely. That's an interesting point that you make, because that's something that we talk about as well, and we've had this chat internally, right? That the educational requirements are there to ensure that people have that basic technical knowledge.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's a brokerage that's hiring somebody that has passed a course is ultimately the one responsible for hiring and training that person before they put them out in front of a client. It's interesting that, something that I don't think a lot necessarily get, and I think this is changing, but not a lot necessarily get in this industry, is that agents and brokers, while they might be independent contractors, they're not self-employed to the extent that they're out there on their own. They are, the legislation talks about this, representing or authorized on behalf of a brokerage. And I think that brokerages that understand that and have training and do some mentoring, some of the things we've heard from others is the importance of mentoring. So maybe you could talk about what you feel the importance of mentoring is. I think a lot of agents who have been mentored have done really well, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, mentoring it's that term that we throw around in every industry like candy, right? But, mentoring is useless unless you have tools and devices to actually monitor before you get to the mentoring, right? I don't mean that in a big brother micromanagement perspective, but how do I sit down and say, hey, listen, Kane, I've been looking at your deals, and here's some things you may want to look at or not look at. If you don't have those infrastructure pieces ahead of that, you'll never know what Kane's doing. So, right. I mean, more in practical terms, even in my own experience, like using an agent coming into a brokerage, the brokers that get it and do it right, like broker owners, that is, Joe, they will say something like this: hey, Albert, you know what, your first X amount of deals, and sometimes I don't even put a ceiling on it. It's really based on their aptitude and proficiency. I'm going to look at every deal. You may not even have submission rights, Albert. You may not be able to hit that button until I've reviewed it, or a delegate, as per regulation, looks at it, does some sort of supervisory role, and says, hey, you know what? Hey, okay, listen, very good there. Why did you recommend that product? By the way, you don't have a suitability form here. How did you actually come to the conclusion that this is a good product for this particular client? You can have those conversations if you put the right mechanisms in them. And there are some phenomenal brokerages and companies across Canada that do that. And man, it's you can actually really see it over the chronology of that agent's development. The ones that don't do it right, those are the ones that 90% of them fall off in the first year and never do $1 million. The ones that do it right, you can see these agents really develop and become very good at their craft.
Now, I just want to unpack a little bit because you said a lot of really interesting stuff, especially, and just for the listeners that are not fully aware, Albert mentioned doing a 5-day course. So for someone to come into the mortgage space and become a licensed agent, you can take basically a week to do a course, and then you can become licensed immediately after. So I'm wondering, Albert, just along that line of thinking, where do you think the responsibility lies to do it right? I mean, we mentioned the regulator, we mentioned, third-party providers like associations, that type of thing, even educators like ourselves at REMIC, but then also, as Joe mentioned, the brokerage itself to put that in. And then, as an industry, right, to hold a standard. We see this in other industries where they have standards that are outside of the regulator space. So where do you think the responsibility mostly lies, and or is it with everyone?
So one thing that should be talked about is that the regulators are upping their game. You know this, Joe, better than anyone on this call, right? So, I mean, you look at BCFSA, you had a legal update this year, and, level 1 and 2 in Ontario, and RECA's really good about making sure there's continuing education. So what I've seen as a body of work is there's this elevation from the regulatory level, which I think is awesome, to up the game. Even if you know this stuff, it really sharpens your knife. It keeps you in the know. So I love that. But ultimately, Kane, to answer your question, I side with Joe's comment that I think ultimately, if I'm a broker owner, I say, listen, I'm going to hire Joe White as an agent. I think it's incumbent on me, not only for the preservation of doing what's right by the borrower, but for the preservation of my business. I am an entrepreneur, regardless of what flag I may or may not be flying. This is my shop. This is my booth. You know what I mean? I got to protect the house. So I think at the end of the day, it's the broker owner's job to make sure the agent's proficient. They're not embarrassing the brand, for a lack of, better terms. But outside of the obvious, I mean, there's also great reasons to do it from risk perspectives. I don't even want to go down the pipe of what happens when you really screw up without oversight. Never mind fines and suspensions and maybe revoking your license, but you have E&O claims and all that other yucky stuff.
I know you mentioned sort of good and bad, or doing it right a couple times. I'm wondering if there's anything that you've noticed about those that come in and do find success. Is there any common elements of those people that come into the industry new and they find success versus those that maybe don't? And we know can be a tough industry coming in.
Yeah, that's a great question. From that perspective, I think the ones that do it right, I think I'm just shooting from the hip here from experience and observation, is, first of all, I think the agent that comes in, the one that does it right, understands that this is a business, and you should have a business plan. You should have financial resources to treat it like a business. Like, no one's going to open up a Dairy Queen and have $4 in the bank, as an example, right? So I do find the ones that don't do it right, Kane, have no war chest, no business plan. They just think, I've got a license and all my friends and family are going to send me business, which is, there's nothing further from the truth, by the way. Because the last people that want to show you their financial underwear is your friends and your family. Trust me, right? So
financial underwear. Sorry, Albert. There's a clip. Financial underwear.
Well, I mean, think about just on that point. Like you know, if your friend has had some economic problem, they're not going to probably tell you. So the ones that do it right, Kane, I think, are the agents that understand they're going into a business. They understand the gravity of the transaction they're managing. They put a war chest in a business plan, and they find the right fit, which kind of goes back to Joe's comment is, I should be interviewing a number of brokerages, and it really is the one that gets it doesn't say something like this. Hey, Kane, I don't know a damn thing about this business, and I want 95.5. And if you don't, I'm just going to cross the street. I have seen great agents take steps backwards on commission because they know they're going to get exactly what they should from a broker owner. Because, last time I checked, and I'll check my calculator, but 95% of zero is a hell of a lot less than 80% of 10 million, just as an example, right?
And can you, Albert, just clarify what you mean by the 95.5?
And can you double check your calculator just to
I will. So
the right calculation.
Okay, the first thing works, so that's good. What I mean by that is, even in my own experience, Katie, when I was building my company years ago, was there was this, I don't know, it's not a very nice term. I don't mean it to sound and impolite, but there's a sense of entitlement from people coming into this industry that know nothing about the industry and will sit across the table and say, I want 95.5 in terms of my commission split. I want 95% of the commissions that are paid to the brokerage. And that is not a unique soundbite. And it's unfortunate because the broker owners that do it right, or even team leaders, if you will, they're not going to relent on that, right? So that agent is going across the street and someone's giving it to him or her, and it's misguided. It's really short term.
Yeah, we see this in the industry. I mean, obviously, it's a wonderful industry as a whole, but there are some brokerages that will operate with one person at the helm and maybe 100 or 200 agents at that brokerage with no other support or full-time people. And that, as you can imagine, is an incredible challenge to set those agents up, as you mentioned, for success in doing it right. And then they're able to provide a higher split, right? And so what we mean by the split, just for the listeners that don't quite understand that piece, is as an agent, when you submit a deal and it gets funded, the lender will pay a commission, and that commission is not paid to the agent, it's paid to the brokerage. And so when Albert says 95.5, as a new agent, you could come in and sort of look at what your split would be. And some agents will look for, obviously, the higher split, the bigger piece of the pie, right? But it's important to understand, as Albert mentioned, the brokerage has costs, right? And if they're paying to train you, if they're paying to support you, if they're paying for infrastructure and software and that type of thing, that all costs money. And the way the brokerage is, go ahead, Joe.
No. Finish your thought. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we think about this from the brokerage perspective. The way that they're going to earn or make money from the agents is primarily from the commission or from fees. And so that's, think about it from the brokerage perspective when you come into the industry.
Yeah, when I first got started in the industry, I remember, and I didn't know anything about what good splits were or not, but I started with a broker who primarily focused on private mortgages and did a lot of advertising to get the leads. And my commission split was 75-25, 75 to the house or the brokerage, 25 to me. And I thought, that was generous, I thought, in the fact that they were providing the leads, which isn't typical. But in what they were really doing was teaching me and training me. And I didn't know that I needed that training. This is going on almost 30 years ago. I didn't know that I needed that training. But as they did train me, I realized that, if I was doing this on my own without this support and this mentoring, I would have fallen on my face. So, giving up 75%, as you're talking about, Albert, 95% of nothing is still nothing. And, for new agents who are watching this, keep in mind that, if you get a commission split of 50-50 or 60-40 for the house, it's not going to be forever. Use that to learn and really hone your craft and get good at it. And then you can demand a higher split when you really know what you're doing and you bring value. So I think, that's such a good point, Albert, about those splits.
And that's not to do a fly-by seagull poop on the industry as far as commission splits, right? There are organizations that run franchise models that pay those types of splits, but it makes complete sense, Joe, because a lot of those infrastructure and risk costs, by and large, are downward. They're at the franchise level.
Right.
That makes sense. Where, my comments are really spearheaded to really don't take on risk. Let's call a spade a spade. I mean, they really don't. If something goes awry, it's actually the broker owner that's on the hook, as you guys know from training these agents, right? That's where I struggle with these high commission splits. It's just a recipe for disaster. And I can tell you, without getting into any boring nonsense here, when I keep saying, Kane, brokers that do it right and brokers that don't do it right, I can actually, just from my own analytics, having the privilege of working at some of those companies in my past, the analytics were very clear. 90, and maybe this is the message for the agents listening to this who are thinking about this industry. 90% of agents in their first year, gone. And or they're doing about $1 million. On average, that's ridiculous. Does that mean they're actually, when I say gone, does it mean that they've surrendered a license? No, not really, because we've made it a little bit too easy, in my opinion, to just keep that license and do it part-time. But there was a correlation to those that didn't have experience, that were looking for the lowest hanging fruit without giving thought to all the stuff that Joel was talking about, and have no success. Whereas the guy or gal who came into the industry and says, you know what, I'm going to take a 70-30 or 80-20 split. They end up doing 5-6 million in their first year. Well, that is a hell of a lot different than 90-95 than a million.
Yeah.
It's actually income. It's sustainable.
So just now, but on that line of thinking, those that come in, and we mentioned earlier, taking it seriously and doing a business plan and having a sort of an understanding of war chest, you mentioned, I think that's really, really good advice. Are there any other, and that to me kind of is a misconception about this industry. Is there anything else do you think that is common misconceptions about the profession or common myths or misunderstandings about the industry as an agent?
Well, I think the industry's done a really good job, actually, in the last 10 years, maybe more than that, to be honest. I mean, Joe, you remember the days where, as soon as you mentioned a mortgage broker to consumers, they thought, oh, these guys are loan sharks and all they do is private mortgages. Really, that's what we were characterized. But I think the industry's done a great job through the efforts of the associations, regulators, more so the associations like MPC, Mortgage Professionals Canada. I think they've done a really nice job of abolishing as much as you can that perception that mortgage brokers are that kind of business. But if I understand the question, Kane, I think where the big gap is right now is internally, not externally with consumers. We always have work to do. There's no question about that. But internally, I think there is a significant gap in education. And listen, I know that's not a fair mud ball to throw, but, one can argue that you can go to a regional symposium or some sort of association event and you see a list of topics, but the reality is a lot of those topics, and I don't mean this to sound impolite, they all sort of kind of feel the same after a while. Whether you go to Halifax, you go to Vancouver, you go to Calgary, it's kind of all the same soup du jour year after year. So I think there's a huge, significant delta in education, not academically. Sometimes it's how you conduct yourself as a professional. I'll give you an example of something that sounds probably soft and stupid, but it's a real thing, right? I still have the great pleasure of talking to guys and gals in my position that I compete with because of my past relationships with them. They're phenomenal lenders that I incredibly respect still. And then there is a, percolating under the current conversation about the behavior of a lot of the professionals in this business in terms of how they interact with business development managers and more so underwriters. It's impolite, it's indignant at times, and it seems to be a growing thing. But I put that in the bucket, Kane, as brokers who don't do it right. Brokers who do it right, man, oh man, they get it, man. So, I mean, if I had to say something to anybody who takes that approach, there's a great book and something I've used in my career, which is as much as I can. Soft on the people, hard on the issue. You don't have to say, hey, Joe, you know what? You're an absolute jerk. I got, you can say, listen, Joe, I've been waiting 2 days for a commitment. I really appreciate if we can get this done. You know what? When do you think I can get that commitment issued? But that is being lost. So that would be an example, Kane, of, but it's always difficult too, right? Is how do you train adults to be good mannered? I mean, you don't have it by the time you're 45, 50 years old, which is kind of our average demographic. You probably miss something at the kitchen table.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I think about I should throw my kids into some type of etiquette course, and then there are people that I talk to who are adults who I think they would do well in an etiquette course, and I probably would do well in an etiquette course as well. There are certain things I can't still figure out where the fork goes and where the knife goes on which side. And I mean, that's not what the etiquette you're talking about, but there's a lot to be said there because, it is that human interaction, and that human interaction means that and your point is that human interaction, not just in our industry, but throughout. I mean, you look at the state of politics today, and if people could talk to each other and say, I respect you, you're a good person, but I disagree with this, or I need you to do this for me, that there's a nice way of doing that.
Joe, it's completely off the topic of what we're talking with our industry, but as an overarching thing, this is my own opinion. I think that the basic human courtesy and good manners is absolutely lost.
Mm-hmm.
It's as ridiculous as I take the GO train in the office, and you blatantly hold the door for someone. No, thank you. You're sitting on a GO train at 6:47 a.m. and the lovely guy or gal beside you's got their phone on, watching a video at full bore, full talks. You go to a restaurant, trying to have a nice dinner with your wife because you're working your ass off all week and think this is our moment. You got some dweeb over there watching the Sportsnet highlights at a restaurant, and his friend or his other significant spouse is doing the same. It's like, why did you guys actually come? You're not even talking to each other.
Yeah.
So, good manners, I think, is just something that's eroding for whatever reason.
That. Did you say dweeb? I haven't heard that one in a long time.
Yeah, I'm showing my age a little bit there. I was going to say doofus, but that's really old.
I think doofus is coming back, actually. I've heard that more and more. Maybe it's just between us.
Are you telling me I actually have a chance of being hip again?
Yeah, it gets recycled, right?
It's awesome.
And Albert, you have had such an amazing career in this industry. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you see the role specifically of mortgage agents evolving, and how I guess you've seen it change already. You've seen customer preferences change, technology's changing. What do you see in the future, in the next 5 years, next 10 years for agents?
Well, listen, when I got in the industry, give or take, give me the standard deviation here, Kane, but about 17% of transactions were going through brokers. I mean, to see where it is now, particularly when you see there's the lion's share of first-time home buyers that use brokers, I think that's just absolutely awesome. Absolutely awesome. So I think the opportunity still exists where Canadians, I think, are starting to learn that mortgage brokers are a viable, critical, important offering in the industry because I don't mean to speak begrudgingly of a quote unquote, a branch manager at a bricks and mortar kind of bank, but they don't have the sophistication, elegance, depth of knowledge that a mortgage broker has. So I love that mortgage brokers are in the space. I think they're paramount to really helping Canadians. But having said that, I mean, I also feel for the brokers because you have maybe it's a sense of entitlement or a heightened sense of education because people are sitting on their phones and they're looking at rates and they'll call the broker and say, "Hey, Jane, I saw 489 today. I want that rate." So I think the education's become a little bit more of a challenge in some ways. But my concern, even though I'm excited, is that it's forcing brokers without those deep databases and relationship creation skills to start going to the common denominator. They're commoditizing a transaction that is not a commodity. We are not selling flipping tomatoes here. But the brokers that get it. Right. They'll educate all the way through. They'll ask the right questions. Well, listen, 489 is a great rate, but your credit score is like not even on the map because, you've had like 4 discharges in the last 5 years and those kinds of things. Right. But I do think the brokers, Kane, are, I'm a huge fan, man. Like, I mean, obviously I'm not on the broker side. I'm obviously back on the lender side where I think they deliver something so economically important to Canadians that it's probably understated.
So let's maybe jump back a moment and look at your history. And other than the job that you're doing today, which obviously is going to be the most exciting, enjoyable job that you have, besides this one, what would you say was a moment in your career that you really enjoyed or got satisfaction out or just stands out to you for whatever reason?
That's a great question too. I mean, I've had so many fortunate experiences, right? Like I've been really, really, blessed, Joe, in my career. I mean, I've worked with some smoking awesome companies there, from Home Trust to FirstNat to leading Verico, building my own company, which eventually, merged into Mortgage Architects. So, I mean, if I had to isolate one, I would probably say, and I mean this respectfully, all the companies that I've had the pleasure of leading, is probably taking that plunge, Joe, where, I had a business plan. I knew that I was building a business. I had financial wherewithal, money stashed in the bank, and obviously a great wife who supported me. It's not like I was forced into building my own company. It was just something I've always wanted to do. It wasn't like I didn't have a job. I was making, good income at a great company with FirstNat, and I thought, it's time to try something. So I think the ability to, at least in my first iteration, to take something from paper concept to reality to see it become what it became, is pretty rewarding. But again, I'll go back to where we started this chat, Joe. All that means squat, because that's not a suggestion that, geez, Albert Collu did it all by himself. He was just a god. Not a chance. Not even close. I mean, I had some phenomenal people working with me and building that company who, had I not had them, I would have been pretty useless. I mean, I can't do everything right.
Yeah, and that really speaks to the power of the individual. When we start talking about technology, this is a people industry. People have to be able to interact with each other and work together. And you're referring to when you started Argentum, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember sitting at, I forget what cafe it was with you when you would just launch that, and thinking to myself, you know what? It wasn't just having the dream. Like you said, you had the dream, but you also had the business plan, and you had you put together some money behind you so that you had all of the pieces together. And I think that's what really sets you apart from individuals who have a dream and take a shot.
Thank you.
Compared to individuals like yourself who have a dream and put the plan together.
And Joe, just along that same thinking, sorry, Albert, I'm just curious because you've mentioned a couple times your wife. I'm wondering if maybe you can share kind of what role you think the people around you have when coming into any industry, but especially being an entrepreneur, what role that plays and how that's worked for you.
It's not dissimilar to what an agent would be contemplating. Yeah, I started a company, but a lot of these are paramount. Like if you're in a situation where you decide you want to pursue this career, and I'm going to underscore, this is a career. It's not a part-time job. It's just not that. But if you're pursuing it as a career, and you need to have all those things we talked about already, Kane, financial wherewithal, real business plan, finding the right match for which company you're going to work with, the most important person never gets discussed, and that's your family. So I sat down with my wife and said, listen, this is what I'm thinking. Of course, I mean, she's incredibly supportive, and we talked about that. Not only that, but it's when you go through business planning, Kane, most people get spreadsheet eyes. Like, oh my God, look at that! I'm going to be I'm going to make $1 million in the first 3 weeks. Look at that. Yeah, well, okay. But you need to. It's not just a matter of asking for your wife's support or your significant other's support. It's also contextualizing. Because no spouse that loves you or significant other is going to say anything other than positive words if you just leave it to, hey, you know what, Kane, I'm going to start a business. They're going to say, oh, you're awesome. You can do this, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't have the next layer, you're screwed. I was going to use another word. You're screwed. If you don't sit down and say, listen, you know what? I appreciate the confidence. Here's the upside, but more importantly, here's the downside. If I'm not successful, this X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're putting on the table is gone. I don't have a tangible asset. It's not like I bought a house and thought, oh shit, the market's gone. Let me just sell and get some cash back. This is gone. It's eroded. And that's the piece I found. And listen, I can tell you, I've seen it personally in my life with good friends who have nothing to do with this industry, who started businesses. I gave them this advice. They did not adhere to it, and 2 of them are divorced. It's a really, really sad thing. So yeah. You got to really explain the downside, and don't get so flippin' full of yourself when you're making those spreadsheets. Everybody loves me. They're just going to jump on. Not a chance. You got to work harder than you ever imagined.
That's a really, really important piece, Albert. Just along that same line of thought, I'm wondering, do you have any advice for anyone considering coming in regards to a work-life blend or balance? And how that may work and how it's worked for you.
Yeah, I do actually. It's actually one of our cornerstones culturally here at Marathon is that, we have what some of the things are called non-negotiables, but we also emphasize balance, right? Where if you're not away from work, in my opinion, you never miss it. And then everything just bleeds into one. So I think the balance has to be, I'm sucking and blowing, Kane, but I think in the early days, it has to be sacrificed. And you need to have that chat with the people that you're taking it away from. Because building a business, any business, I don't care what it is going to take a lot of time, a lot of hours. And you need to get back to restoring that. There's no successful business that can say it's a success at the sacrifice of its family and its friends. I'm sorry. That's just the way I feel about it. Because the irony of most of these situations, Kane, is that if you ask people, why do you work so hard? Most people would say, inevitably at some point in the conversation, I do for my family. Well, that's the very thing you put on a guillotine right now. So I think you need to have that conversation with the family and those that are important to you, including friends, to say, look, this is what I'm doing. I need your support. It's not that you're not important to me. I just need to get this thing done. But my plan is once I get to this stage, I'm going to restore my balance and give you the time. I'm ultimately doing it for you. So
I love the way you summarize that. Do you think there's anyone that is not a good candidate to come into this industry, whether at their certain stage of life and who might that be?
Someone who thinks, first of all, they can do this part-time. So I think, Joe, we've talked about this probably years ago. I don't know how you expect full-time results with part-time efforts. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, you must have a business plan, and that business plan includes everything we just talked about, Kane, support from everyone around you that are stakeholders in your personal life. You better have a cash cow, and that cash cow must include a marketing spend. It must include the assumption that you're not going to make income for a year. I know I've heard 6 months, but I think you're wise to do a year, because when you get close to that 6 months and you're not rolling in the revenue you need, you start doing stupid things. I think you need to find fits, and I think that people need to embrace a notion that is applicable to any industry. Know your shit. I believe knowledge is power. I think people are getting too transactional and not educational. And I'll give you an example. I won't mention the name, but a broker who I have loved for years, I fell off a chair. I actually snickered, thought he was kidding. He asked me 2 weeks ago, Al, can you do me a favor? Can you explain the difference between insured, insurable, and uninsured? So I laughed. I was like, and then I realized that he was asking in full sincerity, like, this is 2024.
Wow.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I think we get so mired into what we do every day that we forget we need to step out a little bit, because once in a while you need to clean the pool, right? Mm-hmm. You need to get out of the damn thing and clean the pool. And that, if you don't have the knowledge base, and I do think, going back to a comment you made earlier, guys, about the ability to educate and relationship build to win the transaction, it can only be done effectively if you know everything about the business. Know your craft inside out. I don't know if I answered your question, Kane, but
no, but I think you did, because really somebody who's not willing to devote that, we've heard before, it's work smart, not hard. But on the flip side of that, I think early on in your career, you have to work smart and hard, right? And that's a recurring thing that we hear from those who've been successful, and they have to be willing to sacrifice. And your point about the sacrificing and getting your family on board and making sure they understand what that sacrifice looks like. It might be late nights. It's like you said, it's easy to say, yeah, I support you, but also, why aren't you here at 5:30? Because I'm building a business. So as long as everybody is on the same page and understand what that sacrifice looks like. So all of those things are, you answered the question perfectly. If you don't have those attributes, you don't have those qualities, it's going to be a real challenge for you to be successful in this industry.
Yeah. And this is what we say to new agents that will come to us as educators and ask us, when I'm doing my resume or when I'm interviewing with a brokerage, what is it that I should be demonstrating? What should I be saying? And my opinion, what we typically say is, think about your ethic, right? And think about like hard work and what the transferable skills are. It's not always necessary to have, finance background or even necessarily a sales background if you're willing to do what it takes. And I think if you have any thoughts on that, Albert, as well, for someone coming in.
Well, so the thing is, your inner drive and your work ethic can't be taught, right? Like it's, I'm an ex-hockey player, as you know, Joe, and we used to say a couple things, right? Like you can teach a kid to play defense, but you can't teach a kid to score, right? So, but it is a learnable asset. You can go about learning the transaction, like the technical parts of the job, right? But that goes back to the earlier points too, right? Is about making sure you have the right match, you have the right broker owner. And one thing that gets lost in all these conversations is, it's important to be confident for sure. And sometimes we risk perceptively being arrogant, but you have to absolutely eat your humble pie, own your shit. If you've made a mistake, own it. We've got this society where everyone wants to make 110 excuses when everyone on the call knows exactly that you screwed up, including you. That's number one. Number two, surround yourself with great people. If you think you're the smartest person in the room all the time, you're not actually smart, because the real smart people are smart enough to know that they don't know everything. And that is applicable to an agent. Know who you're being surrounded by and make that match there to empower all these things we've talked about over the last 40 minutes.
I love that. Was that Steve Jobs, Joe, that said he never wants to be the smartest guy in a room?
Yeah. Yeah. If he's the smartest guy in the room, there's a problem. He wants to hire the smartest people around and manage them.
Yeah, you have to push. Like if you don't have the real smart people around you, Kane, even at this level, what happens if you're not pushed? You just actually start to believe your own bullshit. Like you've got it all figured out, and your poop doesn't stink, and every decision you make is perfect. I've always said
all
openly,
been there too, right, Albert? We've all been
of course,
there.
I tell people that all the time. I do my best, and I can tell you one thing I do perfectly well is I know when I've made a mistake, and I face it. I face that reality, and I work to be better at never doing it again.
Yeah. So I love that.
I realize that once I think I'm all that, I get knocked off my pedestal. And, a few years ago, I got tired of getting knocked off my pedestal. And I thought, you know what? I'm just not all that. And a little humble pie goes a long way. Humility of knowing that, like you kept talking about the personal relationships, knowing that, it's an entire team that has success, not an individual. It's the team behind the individual might be the face, but it's the team that does this.
Totally. It's funny you say that term, Joe. I always tell our staff at Marathon, I just get the privilege once in a while of actually being the face of the organization, but without them propping me up, I'm useless, right? Like, especially with my journey, we probably don't have time with today's call, but I'll tell you, man, you were asking me what my proudest moments are. This might be one of them down the road because it's the single largest challenge I've ever taken on my career. Not because we didn't have the skill set as a group, but the number of things that we had to change from people, culture, systems, service, branding was seemingly insurmountable. And I'll tell you, it's nice to hear people say, wow, you've really turned that place around, Al. And that's really nice. That's great. It's very rewarding. But unless I got great executives, I got Jason with me, who manages underwriting. I got Gary, I've got Roman, I've got Steve Watton. Without them, I'm just a fruit fly.
Transformation sounds like I love
totally.
that.
Complete transformation.
I have one question. You touched on something earlier. You mentioned part-time agents and the challenges or possibly not even being able to do it. I'm wondering what you would suggest to someone who's maybe in a position that they're finding it very difficult to save up a year's salary, but they definitely want to get in this industry. They have a business plan. They know what they want to do. And they feel like they have to start part-time. What would you say to that type of person?
Don't. Honestly. I'm being very, very sincere. Don't. Let me ask you a question, Kane. So you and I decide, look, we've had enough of this business, right? And I say to you, listen, I'm going to come over. We're going to talk about buying a Tim Hortons franchise or we're going to buy a real business. But I don't have $500,000 sitting in my wallet. I know you do, Kane, but I don't. We would probably have this conversation. Well, if we actually believe in our business plan and we're actually doing pro formas and balance sheets and cash flow analysis, you would insert somewhere in there some opportunity to find capital, whether it be a loan, whether it be an equity, whether it be a combination, because we're going into it with the right spirit, which is you want full-time results, you want to really run a meaningful business, then you jump in right. So at an agent level, it's probably not something they want to hear. Do I have to go and borrow, just picking a number, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000? Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Maybe you need to tap into a line of credit. Maybe. There's all sorts of permeations about what you can do. But to expect to have a high degree of success doing it part-time, not a chance.
When you said don't, what you mean is don't enter part-time, don't enter at all.
Don't enter at all.
If you're going to do it part-time.
Been doing this a long time. You and Joe have seen thousands of people. And I don't say that like exaggerate. You guys have seen thousands. You show me any meaningful proportion of those people that did it part-time that are highly successful today. I think I'll give you a week and you won't be able to produce a compelling argument on that. It's just the way it is.
They are very rare. I off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I know that some people will do that. They'll slowly transition into the industry. And if you're, from my perspective, if you're even considering doing it part-time, you have to have a complete plan in place to get you out of the part-time into the full-time, because it's not a part-time career. It has to be a full-time career. So,
okay, that's a different question.
Yeah,
you said enter. I didn't talk. Now, transitioning, I'll give a little bit of license on it. I'll give you a perfect example, Kane, on that. Is someone that happens to be working as a mobile mortgage specialist and says, listen, my runway's 60 days. I just need to transition out. I completely get that. You have to maybe get your licensing, some continuing ed. Totally get that. But that is part of a sophisticated, elegant plan that says I have certain milestones to get to my business plan. That makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
But when you're someone who's doing something so unrelated and, I'm just going to do this part-time. Oh, God.
And that's sort of where I was going with it, was a transition period. Especially what we're seeing now is more people coming in from related industries, insurance or real estate or debt consolidation, accountants,
banking.
Maybe banking that have some connections, that have a client base potentially already, and they want to add this service or even transition as well. I think that
totally
that's
makes
what we're
sense.
seeing.
Yeah, as long as, listen, this is just an opinion, obviously, but I think you have to be, as a broker owner, again, the ones that do it right, they'll stale date that transition. Hey, Mr. White, so what's your transition period? Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't know, probably a couple years. Well, no, that's part-time. Transition to me is probably anything from now to 90 days kind of thing. That's
but that's right. Doing it part-time, full-time is keeping you out of the industry. It's really difficult to stay up on what you need to learn and the information that changes on a regular basis.
I think there are so here's one other thing that we're seeing some people that are really good at marketing and really good at lead generation that may want to get licensed so that they're able to have initial conversations or to be able to market properly, and then work with the brokerage that someone else can take the deal and actually underwrite it and speak with the client. So we do see that sometimes as well. That would be considered a part-time agent, but they're not actually dealing with the deal or even with the client. All right, Albert, is there anything else that you any final thoughts for our listeners?
I would just say this, none of the comments that are made here are intended to scare the bejesus out of you, right? But it's not going to be handed to you. There are so many great brokers that have been in this space from coast to coast, so I've had the privilege of getting to know over the years. They're very successful, but it's not like they just opened their door and people came flooding in. They've built plans, they've built a career, they have built a real business, and they are not afraid to work. And everything that we talked about today, everything from having a plan, financial resources, understanding what their value proposition is, everything to how they manage and interact with their lender partners, they do it right. And remember, it's not easy. It's very rewarding. It's an awesome place. If you got the right passion, go for it, but do it right.
Albert, amazing. You've said so much. I really thank you for spending the time with us today. You are an industry leader. You're a pillar of this industry, and I appreciate you sharing all of your insights that you've learned through your very illustrious career. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you today like this.
Thank you, Joel.
And now, before we sign off here, where can our listeners find you online? We're going to link your book here as well, but is there anything you want to leave with in terms of where they could find you or
I'm pretty accessible. They can go to our website, which is marathonmortgage.ca. They can go to LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find, and for whatever it's worth, I do try and make myself accessible to people who want to do it right. If someone reached out to me because they heard this, said, "Listen, I'd love to pick your brain," absolutely. It's part of the stewardship of a great industry. And by the way, Joe, I just want to say this, if I may. I appreciate those comments, man. I really do. It means a lot to me. It hasn't been easy. And I don't want anyone to think that I have it all right, because I think part of the secret sauce is in the right environments. I usually spend more time talking about all the stuff I effed up along the way, because I think by imparting the mistakes you've made is really where the learning is. It's really easy to say, I did this, I did that, I was great. I made so many mistakes that you need a 3-ring binder to outline them. So,
but they're most important, right? They inform your future decisions. When you have the humility to realize that you made the mistake, you take the responsibility for making that mistake. You can then use that lesson to not make that mistake in the future. It makes you so much better, which is why you are where you are today, because of those mistakes and your successes. But you're a great leader today because of the lessons that you've learned and the humility that you've shown in learning them.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're fantastic, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Albert.
You're welcome, guys. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the $1 Billion Podcast. make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode.
For more in-depth entrepreneurial insights, follow us on social media, and for more info on the show, go to billiondollarpodcast.com.
See you next time.